Right off the bat, I want to start talking about collective bargaining.
Yeah, sure.
During your campaign, I know you talked about reining in state workers' benefits. But a lot of our viewers, like Jeannie Moody, want to know if you ever specifically said that you would include taking away collective bargaining rights for state union workers.
Well, a couple different things. We talked repeatedly, not only in the campaign, but for the 8 years before that, as county executive, I tried to do innovative things to try and balance my budget without laying off thousands of, or hundreds, I should say, in that case, hundreds of county workers with furloughs or layoffs, and repeatedly pointed out that our problem was the collective bargaining laws prevented us from doing that. And instead, our unions would say, go ahead and lay 400 or 500 people off. They didn't care about that. So I brought that up repeatedly as a county official. In fact, even did a reality tour one year to try and draw attention to that. During the campaign, we talked about how we needed wage and benefit reform. I specifically talked about the 5 and the 12%, and I talked about how we'd have to look at all sorts of options. I didn't say one single option, but I talked about the fact that I was open to a full range of options, because ultimately, if you don't, what people need to understand more than anything is that collective bargaining has a cost. The reforms we're talking about do not eliminate collective bargaining. They do, however, give local governments the tools, and the tools they're going to need now more than ever with reductions in state aid. If you don't, the last 3 weeks have shown us what I tried to say a couple weeks ago has been proven. In county after county and city after city, local unions have rammed through contracts that have no additional pension, no additional contribution for health care, and that just proves what our point's been all along is a promise is one thing, you got to deliver on it, and they're not delivering on it.
I think what people are looking for is for you to point to a speech or an event where you specifically said, part of my plan includes taking away collective bargaining rights. Did that happen?
Well, I pointed out repeatedly that collective bargaining is a part of the problem there, and that you have to reform it. I talked about a full range. I didn't announce a specific plan, but probably the most significant document out there is not just one I've talked about, but the fact that one of the unions literally ran a campaign flyer that took quotes from the paper and took quotes from my campaign site and pointed out that we're going to have to fundamentally change collective bargaining. That was something that was stated in our campaign by one of our campaign policy directors. Similar quotes were quoted, referenced to me from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and they used that as an argument as to why not to vote for me. So they knew back then that we were willing to look at any and all options out there, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. Now, the other thing is, I would argue that rights is not an appropriate definition of that. Collective bargaining is something that's part of the statute, but it's not a right. If it was a right, there'd be people rioting around the U.S. Capitol, but right now, federal government employees, even under President Obama, do not have collective bargaining for wages and benefits. If it was a right, the people who are protesting here would be in our nation's capital. But they're not, because it's a political argument. States all across the country have either no collective bargaining for public employees, or they have very limited collective bargaining for public employees. What we're doing is more of the latter. We're narrowing it down for the base salary. But for wages and benefits, we're showing that local governments have got to have the ability to control their own budget, particularly in these tough budgetary times. Otherwise, you're looking at thousands of layoffs of local government employees, or you're looking at major reductions in services, neither of which I think the public wants.
Staying on the budget repair bill, why won't you consider a sunset clause to the collective bargaining rights? It was actually proposed by a fellow Republican, Senator Dale Schultz. Nobody else is proposing it. None of the Democrats we've been negotiating with are interested in that. None of the other Republicans are. So for us to go down the path of an idea that's not on the table with the Senate Democrats needing to have come back, we've been meeting with them for some time. My administration, first it started out with Senator Fitzgerald. My administration has been reaching out to try and work with at least some of the reasonable and responsible members of that caucus who want to come back. This has not been an offer they put on the table. It's not an area they're interested in. What we've tried to hone in on are the things that would actually bring these Senate Democrats back. Some people would say that, don't you think that if your plan works the way you say it will, you'll have more support by the time the next budget rolls around? With the sunset clause, it'd almost be like a 2-year test drive. Well, I'd say the problem is, the reason we're in the situation we're in today is because previous governors and previous lawmakers made short-term, one-time decisions just to get through the next budget. This would be another one of those examples. We need to make a long-term commitment to the future so our children don't face the same dire consequences we face today. In the past, they took one-time federal stimulus aid. It's run out. In the past, they raided the patient compensation fund and the transportation fund. They can't do that anymore.
In the past, they took money out of the Tobacco Endowment Fund. All those were things they said, let's just get through the next budget, and then the next budget came, and they moved on to something else, and then our hole got bigger and bigger. What we're trying to do is provide long-term reform, not just so the state budget is balanced, but so that our local governments don't feel the brunt of all those cuts in this budget in the future.
But don't you think that if it does work, that you'll have support from the majority of people in Wisconsin to continue with that path 2 years from now?
But my point is that proposal doesn't get me anywhere because the Senate Democrats aren't coming back for it. What I'm trying to hone in on are things that ultimately will bring the Senate Democrats back, and that's not anything they've ever brought up to us.
We had solicited a lot of things from viewers, and we've heard from a number of people, even some who voted for you, who don't understand why, in their words, you won't make any compromises on the budget repair bill.
Yeah, and again, maybe that's part of the TV ads are out there, but that's wrong on two counts. One, the bill's already been changed. People forget that because it was several weeks ago. But the bill's been amended per our support after the Joint Finance Committee held 17 and a half hours of hearings. We heard from teachers who were concerned about the grievance process. That was amended to give them some of the same sorts of civil service protections that state employees have that are the strongest in the country, to give them to local schools and to teachers and local officials. We made changes in terms of the retirement system that city officials asked for. We made a series of changes in the Joint Finance Committee. The other part is, as I mentioned over the last week or so, we've reached out to Senate Democrats and made some offers about how they can come back on. Where we're not able to negotiate on is fundamentally removing collective bargaining reform. Because if you take out collective bargaining, what you will have is what other states are facing right now, which is billions of dollars worth of cuts in aid to schools and local governments without any flexibility of how they balance their budgets. Other states are looking at one of two things. They're either looking at passing it on to schools and local governments through massive layoffs or passing it on through billions of dollars of new property taxes. I don't think the public wants either of those two. So if they have to look at what are the three options that we could consider in Wisconsin that states all across the country are considering, there's really three. Do you pass it on through cuts in services and layoffs of employees? Do you pass it on through higher property taxes? Or do you do what we're proposing, which is give local governments the flexibility they need, not just in pension and health care contributions, but there are other things that are directly related to collective bargaining that allow them to balance the budget. And I think given those three choices, I would think the majority of people would pick the one we're pushing.
Some of your critics that have complained that on the budget repair bill, it's kind of your way or the highway, I guess how do you respond to that?
Well, again, it's not true because we've made changes, we've offered suggestions, we've pushed out ways. The one thing I'm not willing to do, though, is to sell out local governments. I'm not going to present a budget that looks at $1.25 billion worth of reductions in state aid and not give them the tools. In our case, our budget repair bill, while we cut in the budget $1.27 billion of state revenue to local governments, our budget repair bill provides $1.44 billion, so almost $1.5 billion worth of relief. I'm not going to take that relief away from them.